Greetings YouTube, the author Mark Simmons here, back for the 13th instalment of my readings from the Psionic Powers Trilogy. In this episode I will be reading a snippet from chapter 10 of my second novel, Purged in Flame. In the story so far, our protagonist left the safety of the manse in a sort of moment of rebellion, but has now found himself and another member of the group. They've been taken captive, basically. Purged in Flame is available on Amazon via Poe Boy Publishing. As always, I've not rehearsed this, so we'll see how it goes. So yeah, this is an extract from chapter 10, which is called The Stag's Head. Whitfield kept his teeth together as the drive went on. He considered his options. At the moment, none of them knew who he was. Would that change when they brought him before either Bala or Dagon? Would either of them remember the assembly hall? Him from the assembly hall? Possibly. Bala seemed to be an astute mind compared to the rest of the gang. But then would she actually care who he was? These immortals like to think that they were above most beings, Whitfield included, which suited him just fine, as he had no interest in their attentions either. Yet he was sure that Bala would be interested in a relative of the Lord Chief Justice. He assumed that she and Yorkton were allies, but to what extent he couldn't be sure. Whitfield got the impression they were fighting on the same side, but deception seemed to run rife amongst these creatures of the night. It was his firm belief that each of them would climb over their own mother to get an advantage on another of their kind. Esther was a very useful bargaining tool for Bala, much in the same way that Whitfield had used her name. But with the way things were now, Yorkton and his men were stretched very thin, and who was to say that they would be able to get in touch with them? His name, on the other hand, was nothing. Once they realised his worth, or lack of it, they would dispose of him in whatever manner they saw fit. He would have to try and talk his way out of this. If that didn't work, he still had the knife Gadir had given him. He could feel it digging into his left buttock, and so far they had made no effort to search him. One little pocket knife ain't going to do much. The van came to an abrupt stop. Whitfield took it that they had reached another set of traffic lights, but when he heard the driver and the passenger doors open, he knew that their trip had come to an end. Time to face the music, fucko. The hand on the back of his neck tightened its grip and forcibly lifted him off the floor. He heard the side door slide open and the cool night air hit him. The vehicle wobbled under him as someone else got out of the van. As he was forced forward, his foot caught on something and he fell. In the seconds he was falling, everything he had known and done through his life was telling him telling him to put his hands out in front of him. Yet there was an overriding thought that came from the back of his skull that said, don't worry about it. That he didn't need to put his hands out. Yes, he was falling, but it wouldn't hurt. Going against the hard wiring of his entire life, going against the hard wiring that his entire life had taught him, he left his arms at his sides. The warm feeling that he had felt earlier rushed up his spine and into his skull. His landing felt cushioned, and he seemed to lightly bounce off something before coming to a stop on what felt like grass. However, as he lay face down on the floor and started to settle into position, whatever he was lying on became less soft. A number of sharp objects started to dig into his ribs, chest and upper arms. The spines of some plant began to work their way through the material of his hood and started piercing the skin of his cheek. Laughter from all around him filled the air. Dumb cunt fell in the stingers. More laughter broke out before he was grabbed under the arm and pulled up to his feet. Guys, do we really still need these hoods? Whitfield was starting to feel the material around his mouth, and his heavy breathing had caused the bag to get hot. Whatever plants he had fallen into had stung his face, and all he wanted to do was itch the offending area. The rest of his body, however, felt cold. The fresh breeze hitting his exposed arms made him think that they were by the river, or in the countryside, or an open space of some sort. Quiet around them also made him think they had driven to the outskirts of the city. The sound of helicopters overhead, the police sirens that had been all he had heard over the last few nights. The sound of helicopters overhead and the police sirens had been all he had heard the last few nights. On the other hand, surely they hadn't been travelling long enough to reach the countryside. "What did I tell you? Shut your fucking hole," his captor said close to his ear. He yanked him forward by the neck, which Whitfield wasn't going to argue. He let the man lead him. "The guy's fatter than he looks," another voice said. "Look at the nails he flattened." "Don't be daft, that's too perfect a circle," a third voice replied. "What did you call me? Can't you see how perfect that impression is?" "Well, how else do you want to explain it?" "You did it again," he heard Esther say somewhere to his left, cutting through the two men's argument. Whatever it was that kept happening must have caught him when he fell. "We'll have nothing from you either." There was the sound of feet stumbling and then a whimper. "Don't you dare lay a finger on her," Whitfield shouted. His call was greeted by another jab to the ribs and a push forward. "No more talking," Herman called with an air of authority, and the group fell silent. The surface under his feet was soft and made very little noise. He was pretty sure that it was grass. As he was shoved forward again, the silence was broken by the crunch of gravel. He tried to count the different footfalls on the small stones, but there were too many. Before long he tripped on something and almost fell forward, but his captor kept him afoot. "Mind your step, fucko." He adjusted his footing as the hard gravel made way for a softer surface again, but this wasn't a lawn like before. The creak of old wood confirmed that it was floorboards. The cold night air subsided as he was led inside. The interior of wherever they were had a familiar smell that Whitfield couldn't pinpoint. His guard squeezed the back of his neck tighter and also grabbed his shoulder. "Don't try anything or I'll break your neck." His hood was pulled off with force. Some of his dreadlocks got caught in it and were almost ripped from his scalp. His eyes watered, but he forced down the urge to complain. Showing these people any sign of weakness would only bring more pain. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the change of light and the tears that welled up in their corners. But after a few blinks, his surroundings became clear, and the familiar smell he had picked up on hit his nose again. There you go. A little extract from chapter 10, The Stag's Head. As always, you can find the links to the Purged in Flame in the description of this piece. You'll also find my Facebook author page, my Instagram page, my Twitter page. Leave a comment, let me know what you think. Let me know if you liked it, let me know if you hated it. I'll see you next time.